do not become a state that taxes our advertising. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Robert.
Okay. I appreciate we finally got Gil Cohen, Omaha Publications, who's our moderator. Kind of go through, we got some questions, but I think we'll probably just move forward. There's 5 after. We got quite a few people. Other people are joining as it comes up. But the purpose of today is webinar is to talk about the tax situation in Nebraska, the property tax. Governor Pillen is looking at reducing the property tax by 40%, which I salute in that aspect of it, but he's looking at other revenue sources to generate to lower the tax for Nebraska residents on their houses. One of the aspects of it was the advertising tax, 7.5% digital tax, which is supposed to be set up on the as we would say, pass through for the most part. It's going to Meta, Google, and other large billion-dollar corporations, but basically looking at a pass through to anybody who advertises on these venues. And what we're here today is to talk about, how the work that we've done at AAF Nebraska, and also the questions. We've got panelists, Rector from AAF Nebraska, Chris Oswald, who was A&A, and Tim Hruza from Mueller, Robak. I hope I didn't butcher that, Tim.
All good.
What's that?
All good.
Okay. So I think with that, we kind of, Tim was part of a lot of seeing what's going on happening in the state legislation during the process that bill was being put with the Revenue Committee, and also taking a look at how, the filibuster went, and they got pulled off for a special session coming up this summer. We haven't got the dates on that yet, but we really want to take a look at that. And we got several questions that Gil's going to be asking our panelists. But please, with anybody who's logged in, if you've got questions along this path, as we have an hour here of time, please ask any questions you may have, clarification of what was being said, and we'll kind of go from that aspect of it. But I do appreciate you joining us. This is part of, I'm a member, this was put on by the AAF Nebraska Legislative Committee, and members of my team are on this call with us: Cassie Warren, Gil Cohen, and you're looking at Lynn Wyman with Kid Glove as well. We helped kind of share our opposition to the bill. We went down and testified with the Nebraska Revenue Committee at the legislative. It got Capitol building, sent in letters, made calls, tried to get everybody notified of what was going on. And I think part of that, with the combination of a multitude of other organizations, with the Omaha Chamber, Lincoln Chamber, the NIFL, the other organizations, was able to put a stop to this. And but I think the Governor Pillen is looking at bringing this back to play with the special session. So I've got the experts on here with Clark, Rector, Chris Oswald, and Tim to go through some of these questions. With that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Gil, who kind of going to go through some of the questions he has on place, and we'll kind of share those with the committee and have a roundabout discussion with this. So Gil, go ahead. You're on mute right now, Gil.
I got it. Yeah, Cassie, thank you for sending me the link. Hey, welcome to the webinar this morning. We planned it kind of a time that I think everybody that joined is probably a good time for them, just before lunch and just after they get their emails done. So as Rob mentioned, we do have some pre-recorded questions or pre-thought out questions. But if anybody on the webinar has other questions, put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. And we'll try to be done here by noon or sooner. So kind of depends on how long the conversation goes. So first thing wanted to chat about is, and this is specifically for Chris and for Clark, give us a high-level overview of what happened in the Nebraska legislature with the tax ad, for the AdTax.
Well, I think y'all know as well as we do, since it was your governor's proposal, but he essentially has at once, as Robert said, wanted to lower the property tax level and maintain the same level of revenue coming in, or at least close to the same level of revenue coming in, looking for other sources. And as we have seen happen in many, many other states over the years, has looked towards advertising, which lawmakers often view as sort of a painful, they think, a painless way of raising revenue, because as far as they're concerned, it doesn't really hit the consumers. It's going after business. It's kind of, it's layered and behind the scenes. Now we know that that's an inaccurate way of looking at it. We've done a lot of research showing the impact that advertising has on a state economy and the number of jobs and things it creates. And we know that if you lower the amount of advertising by increasing the price of it, it's going to have a lot of ripple effects coming down the way. And so, I commend the local folks, you all, for standing up and talking to lawmakers about what's going on. I think Chris will agree that we can be pretty good at our jobs. We know what we're talking about, but especially when you're talking about state issues, those state lawmakers, they want to hear from you. They don't want to hear from the Washington, D.C. folks like us.
I totally agree, Clark, and thanks everybody for having me, and thanks for participating in what was, quite the win through the legislative session. It is not easy to go against a sitting governor who's got a plan and who's going to round up everybody in his own party to push forward on his plan to, cut property taxes. I mean, look, Robert, I'm with you. I'd love to have my property taxes cut. I live in very expensive Virginia, but doing it on the backs of advertising and marketing and companies like yours, it's we're growth drivers. Advertising and marketing drives economic growth. We drive jobs, and it's cutting off your nose to spite your face to pay for a property tax decrease by raising taxes on advertising. And so it's one of those things that, Clark and I, we're back east here in DC, and we, from a national level, we work, well together, along with the American Association of Advertising Agencies, the 4As, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the Digital Advertising Alliance, and others. But when it comes to the states and, proposal like this, having everyone's engagement who is on this call, standing up and letting the governor and the legislators know in Lincoln that this is a bad idea, really carried the day. We in DC are very easy to ignore, but it's really hard for the governor and your legislators to pay no heed to their constituents. So again, thank you all for those who got engaged, seeing some familiar faces. And I'll simply say as well, like, the fight isn't over. It's just that the legislative session ended. The governor is out, we know, touring the state, doing town halls, Cracker Barrels, whatever the term of art is, to try to raise support for this property tax cut plan. And he'll be out there cutting deals. We know he's a deal maker. So it's one of those things that the fight isn't over. We have to maintain a high level of engagement. We have to make sure that our legislators know to hang tough and not to tax advertising or marketing, which is an economic and job creator.
And there were several other opportunities to be taxed that were pulled out of this bill before this. And any particular insight or why those were pulled out and ours weren't before it went to the vote?
well, I may turn to Tim and maybe Matt and others who may have a little more inside information, but it's organization. It's, you know, who can make the best case and who puts up a big enough stink to say, you know, don't tax me. You know, this is one of those areas where it's good to be a NIMBY, you know, and not a my backyard type person. And to make it as difficult as possible, as painful as possible, and to engage with the governor, to engage with your legislators, and make sure that they know that you know, this is not going to go over easy. That this is a bad idea, and to tell them why. But for some of those other industries that got themselves carved out, you know, they're doing the same thing, which means if they're out, that means the governor has to raise more revenue from other sources, which makes us a bigger target. So
A lot of it is the education as well of the lawmakers, to teach them not just the political pain that can come from it, because there are a lot of local folks, but the economic pain, that it really doesn't make sense. And it's a matter of just, you know, making sure that they realize there really is a very vibrant and an important advertising industry there in Nebraska that does create a lot of economic activity, does create a lot of jobs. And we have done, Chris is putting it up right now, we've done a lot of economic research that shows the amount of activity and jobs that are created by advertising. So it's important that lawmakers realize that they get over the perception that advertising is a New York, Chicago, Los Angeles business. It's not. It's Lincoln, it's Omaha, it's every single market where you have service and product providers who are trying to communicate with consumers. And that's every town in Nebraska, every place that has a local newspaper, local radio station. They're all dependent on advertising.
Some of the
Gil, if I could just jump in real quick and just put kind of one more, I think, touch on that, on your question on sort of why does advertising come through to the final reading version of the bill, and some of the other things that are proposed kind of dropped out or were able to didn't make it out of Revenue Committee. Part of it obviously is, I think, the impact or whatever, and some of the work that other groups did was effective with members of the Revenue Committee. I also think there's some general misperceptions around what this bill and this particular piece, the advertising piece, does in writing. And I know there's some legislative staff and stuff on, and I think even I, being in the building talking with senators on a daily basis, this always got referred to as the digital ad tax. And I think it's super important too. And like I said, I'm seeing staffers on that I've talked to and senators that I talk to on a regular basis. But the bill taxes all advertising, not just digital ads. And so I think from the committee standpoint, and maybe even some senators' standpoints, when you're talking about a huge package of a tax reform proposal that catches a lot of things, and this gets deduced to a digital ads tax, people start thinking, well, we're just taxing Facebook, which is $1 billion worldwide company. We're just taxing Google, which is a multi-$100 billion, you know, these are major companies that no one feels very bad about taxing, right? When you start talking, well, they're just the digital advertising. What I think is key about the bill, and you can pull up the final reading version if you want to take a look at it, and it's really confusing to read, but the ad tax applies, Section 11 applies it to every single advertisement for companies that gross more than $1 billion. And it sets it at 7.5%, which is 2% higher than the state's base sales tax rate. That means any ad that's running through any company that's going to gross $1 billion or more, not just digital ads, but any advertisement for a company grossing more than $1 billion is getting taxed. And I do think, because of their specific definitions that deal with digital taxes and those sorts of things, I think a lot of people in the building, a lot of folks, even it took me a long time to sort this out, reading through those definitions and working through it, that it's more than just the Facebook ads you buy or the Google ads. It's every single advertisement that's funneled or runs through those companies. The newspaper, I think, made a really good point. iHeartRadio, which owns radio stations, all of that sort of stuff is taxed. And I do think part of the reason this got carried through so much and didn't have sort of the concerns or the hesitation from lawmakers is that it was couched as a digital ad tax against Facebook and Google, not the industry-wide impact that it really will have on, people like Lynn Wyman, who I've talked to repeatedly, and the work that she does in Omaha, and you members that are here on the call today that have businesses in Nebraska that will be hit with this tax. So again, not to filibuster, I guess, the conversation, but I think some of those details do get lost with senators when you're talking about 10 different types of taxes and you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars or $1 billion even in tax relief. We kind of lose sight of that, and it kind of got written off as this is only taxing Facebook, and it is not as simple as that when you dig into the details.
So conceivably, companies like Hearst or Gray that are billing over $1 billion nationwide, my boss would be happy if I did $1 billion in sales, but these are, other major influencers or advertising opportunities in Nebraska, and so they would be included in this as well. Is that what you're saying, Tim?
Any company doing business in Nebraska and whose combined gross advertising revenue exceeds $1 billion.
Got it. Some people, including some of the state senators and some statewide associations, are saying this only impacts the giant corporations. So you kind of touched on that a little bit, like Amazon, Meta, and Google. Obviously, it's more than that based on what you just discussed. Why should smaller advertisers or the ad agencies be concerned? I'm going to ask Chris that question.
So yeah, it's a great question, Gil, and it's because exactly what Tim says. It's revenue, but going back to fundamentally, it's from a tax point of view. Taxing advertising is, in our view, and generally in any form, taxation of advertising or marketing. Advertising and marketing is a business input, and I liken it to building the better pencil. Just like it takes wood and graphite and tin and rubber and paint to build a better pencil, it doesn't matter if you've built the better pencil if you can't tell anybody about it. Advertising and marketing is a business input that is vital to American commerce. And if you're not able to market that pencil, what good is it? Maybe the best new pencil that nobody has ever heard about. So it's important. And then at the end of the day, that product, that pencil is taxed, whether it's sales tax or in some other form. Same with services. So everything that goes into producing that pencil and putting it into the stream of commerce is taxed as advertising is as a business input. Taxing advertising and marketing twice leads to tax pyramiding, which is a bad idea from a tax policy standpoint. But again, more to the point, we go back to looking at what does advertising marketing bring to the Nebraska economy. And I just flashed up that one pager that we circulated around the state. It's $40 billion in economic activity. It's over 200,000 jobs within the state. For every one advertising and marketing job in Nebraska, it supported 75 other jobs. Is that something that you want to handicap? Do you want to diminish that? I don't think so. So from a policy standpoint, especially now with Nebraska in your state recovering from the devastating tornadoes, we need to be fostering small business. We need to be engaging in more commerce. We need to be rebuilding, and we don't need to be impeding those efforts.
And it seems like a lot of this really does affect the small businesses. I don't say mom and pop businesses, but a small business that can't afford TV, can't afford radio, can't afford a lot of print, where they're going to most likely pick a Google or an Amazon or a Facebook because it's significantly cheaper and they can market to their 30,000 followers or whatever the situation is. So I don't know how many small businesses are out in Nebraska, but I'm sure that there's quite a few, and I'm sure it would affect them quite a bit.
Yeah, digital marketing and marketing on those big platforms gives those small businesses an unprecedented ability to be able to target their local audiences. I mean, Google and Facebook are looked at as big multinational corporations, which they are, but they're also very much local advertisers in that you're able to target those communities and those audiences that are closest to you.
And you're passing that tax on the smaller, just like you mentioned, the smaller community that,
Exactly.
yeah.
And it gets passed on to consumers ultimately, Gil. I mean, that's
Sure.
the thing. We're talking about higher prices we're still in an inflationary environment. And to Clark's point, here's the thing. Let's say you're starting a small business. Let's say you're opening a restaurant, or you've got, you've built the better pencil, or what have you. Let's say you've got $10,000 to get the word out. The question is, you've built a better pencil. Who needs a pencil? If you've built a better restaurant, who is in your community that you need to come try your Reuben sandwich? If you've built a better mousetrap, who's got a mouse problem? And that's where modern data-driven advertising really allows the small business, the small challenger company who's doing it better at a lower cost with a better product or service to compete with the big guys. The big guys already have their audience. They already know who's got a mouse problem. They already have been selling, pencils forever. It's the up and coming challenger. It's one of the things that we've seen really a real explosion in small business entrepreneurship, in large part because of data-driven advertising using, some of the big platforms. Yeah, they're making a lot of money, but they're generating a heck of a lot more economic activity for this country. That's something that we don't want to retard. We want to make sure that we're still fostering small business and medium-sized business growth within Nebraska and throughout the country.
Yeah, it seems like somebody really needs to sit down with the governor and explain to him, say, the more that these businesses can advertise, the more tax revenue is generated by just sales tax, because now you're getting people to come in to your shop, to your store, and you're generating additional sales tax based on that advertising investment. It's really an investment. It's not a cost. It's an investment in your business. Cassie had a great question while we're on this topic. How does legislation like this impact the competitive landscape for Nebraska businesses in the national landscape? And anybody can take that on.
Well, I think to the extent that you have national, regional advertisers that are looking at buying advertising across different markets, you increase the cost of advertising, you make the Nebraska markets a little bit less attractive as opposed to some of the others. Marketers want to use their dollars in the most efficient ways possible. To the extent that you have any kind of border markets as well, we have found that the dollars will go across the border to media outlets where they can still reach some of those Nebraska consumers, just because, again, it's cheaper, it's less efficient.
Conceivably, the state of Nebraska, the tourism office that advertises all over the United States would be affected on any of the digital that they're buying, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of this, there's some real flaws in how do you determine who's assessed and at what level, and it's similar. There's a similar law passed in Maryland about 4 years ago, and that's been tied up in litigation ever since, and that's costing the state of Maryland that much to litigate it out. And while they're collecting the tax, they better not spend it, because we're confident that the Maryland tax, the ad tax in Maryland, is going to be found unconstitutional, and the state's going to have to refund all of that money. So, if the governor is ultimately successful here and is able to pass his tax shift / increase onto advertisers, there will be litigation. We're confident that we'll have it overturned on any number of grounds. And so at that point, yes, it'll drag on for 2, 3, 4 years, but ultimately the state of Nebraska is going to have to pay that money back plus interest to, all of those that were forced to pay the tax. So there's that. But generally speaking, Gil, again, broader perspective, again, we're talking about $1 billion, these are big companies. Certainly they can afford the tax, yada, yada. Two problems that I have with that is, number one, it is $1 million or $1 billion now, but the next time the state runs into some problems, that gets lowered down to $500 million, or maybe it's $200 million. Maybe it's less. Once you set the threshold, that threshold will only come down and increase taxes on more and more companies and advertisers, and it's going to impact the whole industry and business and commerce in the state. More to the point, once they find and make advertising and marketing a source of revenue, then it's the first chink in the dam, and then the floods come, because there will be other ways that they will decide that they need to tax advertising and marketing. So it really is one of those that we need to win. We need to preserve advertising and marketing as a source of economic and employment growth in the state.
Yeah, it sounds like once the floodgate is open, it's open, and there's nothing. I can't remember the last time a tax was canceled somewhere.
There's an old saying here in DC that there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government tax or program.
So this is open for all panelists. Should we expect this to come back in a special session? And if so, how can we continue to advocate for our industry?
Maybe I'll jump in here and give you at least what I know on the ground, and Matt or other staffers might have a more direct line from senators on where things are headed. But the governor is currently working on a series of meetings with legislators. There was some news reports out of a meeting at the governor's mansion last week as senators met, a task force, I guess, that's getting together to discuss what the new approach or very different approach, tweaked approach might be for a special session. The governor is on record as recently as, maybe yesterday, actually, I might have read something this morning where he's quoted saying he's going to do still, committed to having a special session to find a way to provide some property tax relief or tax reform for Nebraskans. The timeline that has been announced or indicated, targeted, appears to be late July, early August. There's still, I think, a lot of, decisions that need to be made by senators. And as any senator that I've talked to would tell you, a pathway to 33 votes to get it done. But I think all indication right now is that we're still headed toward the discussion, toward a special session at some point this summer. I would tell you that I have no reason to believe that advertising tax is off the table. I think that is well within the conversation of the senators that are sitting around a table. I know the governor's doing his town halls. I have not personally been to any of those yet, but the reports out and the things I'm hearing from people who have been able to make it to them, he's still citing advertising taxes. Most of the same things that have been talked about before: legal services, accounting services, business input type things to be taxed, to again shift the focus from property taxes to sales tax or consumer based types of taxes to offset that conversation. So I feel pretty strongly that we're still headed in that direction. You'll have a lot of senators, I think, that would tell you that there's no point in doing a special session unless we get to 33. I have yet to hear sort of what that plan that would get to 33 looks like, but we're still talking to legislators, and I think it's good for senators to hear from you, Nebraska businesses that are doing this sort of a thing, that are working on advertising, to hear how this affects your clients. I had one member who I talked to earlier this session that gave a really good example of what it would mean for an advertising. You're doing advertising services for a small business. What does a 7.5% sales tax mean toward a monthly budget, or just an advertising run that you might work with? And I think those types of examples, hypotheticals, a thoughtful email to a senator that says, hey, this is how it would affect my business X located in Lincoln, and here's the type of clients that we assist. And doing that 7.5% as it was proposed in the spring will cost the small businesses I help 7.5% more a month that comes out of their bottom line. I think so. Hearing those things while we're not in the middle of the noise of the session and the other things senators are juggling, I think keeps that fresh, and particularly as the governor and the task force and the other senators that are working on reform start to make the decisions about what they think they want to propose to try to get 33 votes for. And so I think now is a really good time for people to be reaching out, even if we don't have a specific date for a special session. I think sometimes when it's quieter, a thoughtful 2-paragraph, 3-paragraph email from a constituent to a senator can make a lot of impact.
That's a good point, Tim. I'm going to continue with you on this other question from Neil. Is there potential for recommending an alternative strategy to the governor beyond just don't do it? And his read is that the governor would potentially entertain some alternatives, but are there any alternatives out there that he would consider?
I think that's a little bit more of like a theoretical question, I think, for the senators who are aimed at providing a solution, right, to the property tax question. I think from a what should we collect sales taxes on to offset or buy down or pay off what we're currently funding through property taxes, I think that there's a laundry list of sales tax exemptions or things that aren't currently subject to sales tax that are being considered. I also think, and just to give you some background for those of you who aren't familiar, a lot of this effort last summer started when the governor appointed a task force that was a work group that was set to have a series of meetings to discuss property tax valuation, right? So it was comprised of county officials, assessors, Farm Bureau representatives, the chambers of commerce, a whole bunch of people at the table to talk about, hey, how does property valuation affect, as valuations continue to skyrocket across Nebraska communities and the farm sector, that affects the bottom line for taxes, because the tax rate, the percent you pay stays the same, the levy, but the valuation goes up, so you pay more. And that was kind of the problem that folks started looking at. I think, and I wasn't in the room for it, but the reports out of that seem to suggest that after a few meetings discussing valuations, that sounded pretty complicated. And so they started refocusing then on what's a better pathway to get to the $1 billion number that you put down on paper. And so we started heading down the sales tax exemption side. And then it becomes what's more popular or less popular. I think there's some opening, and I talked to a senator last week who's kind of still discussing it, but I think there are some plans out there that could look at a valuation approach, that could look at how we're funding taxing entities with current funds that are there and where that's all going, but how you help people from the valuation side in a different way and make the real impact. Part of the problem with that too, Gil, though, is that some of that is not as fast working, right? That takes some time. If you're going to put a change to how we do valuations, it could take a couple of years to see real relief, as opposed to cutting $1 billion off the property tax rolls and replacing it with other money is a lot faster way to see some impact. So I don't know what senators will work on. I'm told that the meetings are everything's on the table, right? Kind of back to square one, but obviously knowing that they had a decent number of votes and support for what they proposed this last session. So I think that's kind of the starting point, and seeing if you can tweak there rather than starting from whole cloth. But there are other ideas out there that would make an impact.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. Thanks for your input. Go on.
I was saying, when you're talking about sales taxes, I really do have a lot of sympathy for lawmakers. When the sales tax was first enacted in most states long ago, it's a consumption-based tax, and it was a goods-based. We were a goods-based society. As we've transferred over to more of a services-based society, it makes sense to start looking at what services make sense to tax if you're going to stay with that consumption model. And frankly, there are a number of services that do. My apologies to anybody who's who has a laundromat or a dry cleaning service, but if you tax laundry detergent, maybe it makes sense to tax dry cleaning. They're both end use type services, consumption, but again, advertising something like that's an input doesn't make any sense in a sales tax, consumption tax model. unless you're going to an antique store and buying an old classic ad for your wall. Nobody buys an ad because they want to take an ad home and enjoy it. They buy an ad because they're trying to sell other goods and services.
And it seems like a lot of these taxes that were proposed in this bill may or may not have directly affected homeowners anyway. You know, laundromats, gum, candy, some other stuff that was thrown in there that might not necessarily would even help a homeowner, assuming that if you're going to a laundromat, you're probably renting someplace and you know you're not paying property taxes, so you're not getting any benefit from this cut.
I think that's right. And again, but not to get too far into the tax discussion of a progressive versus a regressive tax, but you know, if tax on advertising and marketing goes through, it's going to, you know, be passed through the form of higher prices to the end consumer. You know, to your point, Gil, obviously property tax cuts, so they're a great idea, but you know, you're not. It's the net is you're going to be raising taxes and fees on other you know, Nebraskans maybe who can't quite afford you know, to buy a house. Maybe they are renting, you know, or you know, they're not property owners. Look, there is a benefit there, but ultimately the governor should be looking to cut spending, you know, honestly, rather than, you know, let's cut the property tax and cut spending. But that's a whole different conversation. Again, advertising and marketing is an economic driver for the state, for our nation. And you don't want to impede that with a bunch of taxes that are ultimately going to get passed down, and they're going to hurt average Nebraskans.
Well, and ultimately advertising by driving economic activity, by driving sales, increases tax revenue through sales tax and through income taxes by making businesses more affluent.
Mm-hmm. Clark, this is a question for you. What other legislative issues are happening on a statewide or national level that will impact the advertising industry? Is there anything else out there that we should be aware of or pay attention to?
Well, we were talking earlier about you know, data-driven advertising, and there are a lot of states that are trying to limit the responsible use of data to be able to target consumers in a way to, you know, let those consumers get ads that they're more likely to be interested in. Mm-hmm. Again, you know, Chris and I work a lot on those issues as well, and we recognize that there are a lot of restrictions that, you know, make sense in terms of responsibly using that data. But the ad industry has done a lot on a voluntary basis, and we're advocating for a national law so consumers and businesses all across the country will have the same level of protection and awareness of what is and isn't permitted.
Interesting.
Absolutely. And on top of that, Gil, as Clark said, you know, the whole notion of data privacy, advertisers for, you know, going all the way back have had to respect, you know, their consumers, their customers and potential customers. So we are very much pro consumer privacy. We do want a national law that protects individuals' privacy, it preserves their choices, but is still workable for companies and for nonprofits and charitable organizations. And the responsible use of data to be able to drive modern day data-driven advertising and marketing is key. And because with the responsible use of data, we have pretty much solved for the annoying ad, right? If you have tailored advertising coming to you, I'll use myself as an example. I live in a condo in Virginia. Nobody needs to advertise a lawnmower to me because I don't have a yard. And it's, you know, it's annoying for me and it's a waste of the advertiser's dollar. But if you want to advertise anything related to golf, I am your mark. I mean, that is it, because I'm a golf nut. So that's a good spend of the advertiser dollar. It's interesting to me. I may not buy the product, but I'm interested. I'll look at that ad. So that's what I mean. Responsible data-driven advertising is a boon, not only to advertisers, but to the individual. It's important.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the local small businesses are using to try and attract their customers. And that's what is ultimately being costing more because of the digital advertising tax or the advertising tax.
Tim, you touched on this in terms of the meeting at the governor's mansion, but how's his road show being received? Going across the state and talking to various people. Do you have any insight to that?
Governor's done several town halls, is what they're calling them. Grand Island, Omaha, Bellevue, Omaha suburb, I think Beatrice. There might have been another one either yesterday or might have been one yesterday too, but it seems to be, I mean, responses are mixed. Obviously, we've only seen news coverage and heard what's come out of it. It's hard to know how much that moves the needle. Some of the newspaper coverage has been positive in terms of the amount of people that are coming out. Some of it's been a little less positive. One of the headlines, I think, was, that maybe out in Grand Island, that it was met with some hesitation or concerns. I think there is generally, Gil, and this is true of any sort of a tax proposal, and historically in Nebraska, when these things have come forward, anytime that you are raising some tax, no matter what it is, there's always hesitation and concern about how that impacts the people who pay those taxes. So I think when you're in this arena and you're talking about, what's worse, property taxes or sales taxes, probably depends a lot on the perspective of the person looking at it. I have not seen any updated polling or anything like that. I know, like, one of the other X factors that's going on right now is that we're in the middle of campaign season. Primaries took place in May, and you've got several senators, incumbents, who are up for re-election right now. And I think all of the incumbents were successful. I'm recalling Senator McKinney's election that was at one point going one direction, but I think he ended up winning that too after the ballots were finally counted. So with all the incumbents kind of coming out of their primaries in okay shape and some in very competitive races, the question is, what does public opinion do heading into November? And does that affect elected officials? And I would stress this again, and not to be repetitive, Gil, but that's why now is a really good time for those of you who own businesses in Nebraska to reach out to your local senator, particularly if they're up for election, and just tell them your story. It does not have to be, we don't like the plan or we do like the plan. Just tell them what your business does, who you talk to on a daily basis, who you're working for, and why a 7.5%, again, 2% higher than the base sales tax rate as proposed in that bill, why that would be really bad for your clients. Not even for you, but for your clients. I think now is a really good time to get that message out and have them hear from you as a constituent and as somebody who's affected directly.
And have your clients get engaged too. Yeah, if you've got clients, reach out to them and say, hey, this is their fight too. Because if you're an agency, like Roberts or others, this is going to if this thing goes through, it's going to translate to higher rates for them. It's going to translate into, higher prices to get their word out. And so this is their fight too.
Well, and I would point out that the roadshow is an opportunity also. I mean, the industry through AAF Nebraska has done a great job in the Capitol with the Day Under the Dome and communicating with senators. But find out when those governors' meetings are. Get some industry folks out there and stand up and say, why are you trying to hurt my business? Let him hear from advertising folks also. Doesn't have to be just the senators.
And it sounds like, I'm going to direct this back to Tim again. It sounds like there is at least one cheerleader on the Senate floor, Julie Slama, who did the filibuster. You think she'll continue to filibuster that if the governor gets a special session?
I think that far be it for me to tell the future, but I think it's really hard to call a special session unless you feel very confident that you've got 33 votes. And so I think, but I would also say, and so yes, I do think that it will be a fight. I do think it will require 33 votes to overcome a filibuster. I think Senator Slama has been very clear that she opposes sort of raising some taxes to try to offset others. So I think she would be poised to continue that effort along with others. I mean, she was not alone on the floor with that either. in several senators, bipartisan effort, really, opposed to 388 when it was on the floor, both Republicans and Democrats that were opposing it. So I do think you'll see that if you come back for special session, which is why 33 is needed. I guess I would also just say, too, that sort of being outside of the confines of session, being in the special session arena, counting to 33 is a different thing to do before there's a bill pending before the legislature to take votes. And I think that's sort of the message too that I've been talking to senators about. And part of it is sitting in my chair right now, and you all too, we have no idea whether it will be 388 or 388 Part 2 or 388 Light if they go to a special session. And it's one thing for a senator to say, yeah, I'm on board with 388. Yes, you make these tweaks, I'll vote for it. Then the bill's introduced, special sessions called, legislatures convened, public hearing, 3 rounds of voting, just like we had this last spring. You need to hold through 33 votes through 3 rounds of votes after people start to hear from constituents and folks that are negatively impacted by whatever's on the table. And that it just creates a little bit different dynamic as you head into a special session. It will be a fight, no matter what. I cannot imagine very many versions of a property tax relief or reform bill that won't be met with substantial opposition from someone in the legislature, and particularly considering how the unicameral works without the party caucusing that we do. Every individual senator gets to decide whether they like the bill as a whole, whether they like one small part of it or really hate one small part of it, and they get to decide how they handle the bill and what they want to do tactically or strategically if they like it or don't like it. And I think that always puts a wrench in the gears. And it makes Nebraska such a unique state too, in that a lot of what we do when there's friction or controversy rises to that 33 vote threshold, whether it's Senator Slama or whether it's Senator Conrad or another senator that decides that they don't want to do a tax shift. I think we're headed toward a filibuster approach to any bill that comes in this area.
You guys kind of touched. Go on.
Well, I was just going to add on, Tim, to your point earlier, though. If the governor won't call a special unless he's confident that he can get something through, he doesn't want to get a strike 2 on this. Maybe he does, maybe, and it is one of those things, though. But to your earlier point, it's such a good one. Is right now is the time to be engaging with your legislator, with the governor's office, to again reiterate the importance of your business, importance of advertising and marketing to the overall economy. If you need resources, I just sent the one pager I flipped up earlier to Robert. He can float it around. Contact Clark, contact any of us here in DC to provide additional facts if you need them. But really, Gil, to your point, Robert, yours earlier, it's the interaction, the personal story of your business, your customers, your clients that's going to resonate better than anything that we can do here back east. Sorry, Gil, go ahead.
No, that's okay. This is what we have you guys on the air for. So
Yeah,
the information we have, the better.
As Chris said, it's doing it now. You're educating before they come into session. The best AdTax vote is the one that does not happen.
All right.
Yeah, it's not nearly as dramatic because you're not talking about the win, but if it doesn't happen, that's the best thing of all. And that's why the efforts of AAF Nebraska over the years, they didn't just do the Day on the Dome this year, but they've done it in previous years also to educate those lawmakers up there. And so the groundwork had been done before, and I really think that helped in the defeat in this last session when the governor brought it up.
You guys touched on this a little bit earlier, and so I might ask you to expand upon it a little bit. But Cassie had another question. Other than Maryland, have other states passed similar taxes on advertising, and how has that gone? And maybe you can go a little bit more into what's going on in Maryland with the lawsuit.
Well, I can give you a little deep history. Back in 1988, I think, 87, back before Chris and I were involved, the state of Florida passed a very broad-based advertising tax. It was pre-digital days, obviously. It was in effect for about 6 months and was repealed because of all of the things that the industry said were going to happen did happen. stations, newspapers lost revenue. Florida, the panhandle markets, all that money went over to Mobile, Alabama. There was a real benefit. Alabama benefited from the Florida ad tax, but Florida certainly didn't. And since then, we've had probably 35 to 40 states have serious proposals to tax advertising over the years, and they have all ultimately been defeated because I think the industry has been organized, but also we've got the facts and the data on our side in terms of the jobs and activity created.
Is that,
Yeah,
Rob?
in 1987, to Clark's point, the Florida law, they actually called a special session to repeal the tax on advertising. So believe it or not, so it is, we do have experience with this. And you had mentioned a couple of other states. No other state has passed what Maryland has done. There have been a few states who've considered it. In fact, California, if you can believe it, introduced a bill in both the Assembly and the Senate. The Assembly bill was very similar to what the governor was proposing in Nebraska, and somewhat similar to the Maryland law. And that made it through one committee, and then it got shelved by the Revenue and Tax Committee. And then there was another similar bill in the California Senate that was actually a tax on data and data underlying digital advertising, and that's being held up as well right now in the Senate Appropriations Committee. So even California realizes that this is not the best idea. This is not the best road to go down. And I can't imagine a state more different from Nebraska than California. But even California, my native state, they haven't gone down that road. So yeah.
Is that with those particular examples, or those things that we can have access to send to the senators and say, hey, this didn't work in Florida. This is what's, you want to set yourself up for a lawsuit like Maryland. This didn't go through in California. Is that something, Rob, we can put together?
We can pull some stuff together on that, Gil. We can dig up the old 1987 collateral. We're gonna have to find a mimeograph machine, I think, but we can pull some information like that and add some more information onto a one pager. But
give us your fax number.
Yeah, exactly. Fax it to you. That's good. That's a good one, Rob. Good one, Clark.
Too funny. And that was actually my last question for Chris, was about the California issue. So I think we got a couple minutes left here. Is there anything else, Tim or Clark or Chris, you want to kind of add to the discussion that we haven't touched on? Or
I like this interagency Olympics special. That's pretty cool. All right. That's Scriptown Brewing Company. Boy, I might have to fly out there for that. That looks cool.
We have a lot of good breweries out here, and distilleries too.
Well, and I would suggest, as I've talked to ad clubs across the country, when you do events like that, don't be afraid to invite some of the local senators as well. Give them a little FaceTime with the advertising industry. Let them meet some of their constituents and realize, again, there's a vibrant advertising industry out in Nebraska, and that's a great way to show it off without having to necessarily lobby them as such.
Sounds good. Well, I guess we're just about out of time. What do you think, Rob?
I appreciate it. You did a great job, Gil.
I was prepped. I had questions here, so it was a little easier, but
I do appreciate everybody who submitted questions. That was great. There's a few of them that didn't get answered, but I think we're trying to make a point here is we need your assistance. All small business owners, people that work in the advertising industry, or mom and pop businesses. Really, it's an ordinary but necessary expense, for example, to promote your business. So if you take away that ability to promote your goods and services, you have a good chance of shutting your door down. And there were some articles put out in the Nebraska Examiner about a creamery in Omaha that she did most of her business online. And I think it really come down to, but it significantly hurt her business. The question came up, I think, with the advertising is, what other alternatives do people are looking at advertising out there? Well, there's newspapers, there's other things, there's smaller scenarios going on for advertising, but to get the frequency and the reach that you have to advertise on these larger entities. And you'll get a pass through. If this tax goes through, you'll get a pass through, and your amount of money that you're able to spend on your advertising will go down. And that has a cascading effect on the rest of all the other tentacles that reach out to other industries in Nebraska. So in the result, the state of Nebraska will have less revenue together because of this tax. It'll have a reverse effect. And you can see that across the board anytime a tax is raised. We need your help to reach out to the state senators, their aides, write letters, make calls, do whatever you can to get the opposition out there. There's newspapers that will take your op-eds or your opinions and put that out there. I did a couple op-eds, one in the Nebraska Examiner, one in the Lincoln Journal, voicing my concern and testified. Just get involved, knock on the doors, make your opinion known. That's all we're asking. So you're in the industry, so we'll go from there. So Terry, did you have something that you wanted to add to this or not? Okay, so I think what we'll do is wrap this up. It's noon here, but again, I appreciate this. This is going to be this is recorded, so we'll have ability to play it back later. We open this up for both members and non-members of the group. So for all non-members, I appreciate you joining, and please consider the other benefits of American Ad Federation of Nebraska. We offer things like this for free for our members, but we open it up because it is crucial for all businesses in Nebraska.
This will be.
I'd like to commend the local industry for all that you have done. I mean, Chris and I can give you materials, we'll give you support, but ultimately this is won or lost by the local folks, and y'all have done a fantastic job so far, and we appreciate that. We like to get a lot of credit from our members nationally, but ultimately you're the ones who are doing this.
I was going to ask Rob and Terry, this will be, since it was recorded, this will be a link, shareable link that we can put up on our LinkedIn pages or forward to other folks, correct?
Yeah, we'll put it on our website probably tomorrow morning after Ann has a minute to go through it real quickly.
I have to get my agent to send you a release though.
Yeah.
Well, thanks Tim and Clark and Chris, and thanks to Rob and Terry for putting this together, and appreciate your time and your input. And unless Rob has something else, I think we're done.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.